Welcome. I am going to go through all of the things you need to know before you take your test for Unit 2. Many of you have not taken the test for Unit 1, so I hope that you will catch up if you haven't done so, because I really hate for you to have to do it all at the end. Um, from your music appreciation course on the left, if you are doing this today, you'll see it over here because it's telling you what you need to be doing today, which is reviewing. That's under Learn all day. And actually, part of it is also your choice. If you're doing this later, you can go up to content to find it. We are on 2.13 and 2.14. So 2.13, just to show you this is also showing you that you're continuing your music log that's due on Monday. So this is just telling us that if you go here, your choice is to catch up, review, anything else you think you want to get done. So that's part of the time that you might spend today. Completing your work in progress, filling out your music log, that was already on there anyway. If you haven't done your discussions, if you want to respond to somebody's discussion post, that's perfectly fine as well. And reviewing the prior lessons. Okay, so on the second page, there's always a student guide, which in this case is not as important as it will be for the reviewing. Okay. If I go back, if I go back to content, it takes me to the content of what we're doing here. And then you can actually come down to 2.14. Or maybe you're doing that because might be doing it on a different day. So here I am on 2.14. The introduction is simply just telling us, hey, it's time to review. It's not a whole lot, else other than this is this student guide also is not really as important as when we go back to doing the actual lesson, not just the introduction. Review blues, gospel, soul, and Motown music. This is what I really want you to download. Okay, so I'm going to open this now. Comes down here, and here we are. Okay, so these are the objectives you want to make sure that you're going over before you take the test, and the key ideas. So first is blues music. I'm not going to read all of this to you because you can read it. You can also, obviously, like I said, download this and go over this and study it. You might want to have somebody help you and ask questions from this. Notice that one of the things I wanted to say is right here. I feel like this is a little bit hard to read if you don't remember those Roman numerals. But remember, this is I, which is Roman numeral 1. So you have 4 bars of that. This is the blues pattern, 8-bar blues pattern, or I'm sorry, 12-bar blues pattern. And you have 4 of the 1 chord, which is the tonic. Then you have 2 bars of the 4 chord, which is the subdominant. Then you have 2 chords of the tonic, the 1 chord again, 1 bar of the dominant 7 chord, which is the 5/7, 1 bar of the 4 again, which is the subdominant chord, and then 2 more bars of the tonic. We talked in our lesson about how if it does a turnaround, it might actually go back to the 5/7 again, the dominant. But I don't think that's going to be on the test. So remember this pattern where it ends both in the tonic, two bars of the tonic. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of go over that little part of it. But the rest of this you can pretty much read, go through. Important blues artists, it's going to be important to know that because those are going to be ones that will be on the test. They were also on the quiz. So if you did well on the quiz for blues, then that won't be so much difficult other than maybe reviewing. Okay, here's some little things about the relationship to history and culture, and they really didn't put that much compared to all the things we learned about it. Here are some sample questions that you could ask yourself or have somebody in your family ask you. All right, and then gospel music. Okay, here are the objectives that you want to be able to do and the key ideas. Okay, so we talked a lot about how slave owners indoctrinated slaves to be Christian, and they taught them that Christianity practice, but slaves took that and created music from that, which are the spirituals and hymns that would eventually also become gospel music. Okay, so talks about that. 3 main traditions. Okay, here are some important gospel artists you might want to go over and remember these. We didn't even talk about Edwin Hawkins, but this is one of my favorite gospel songs. I'm just getting off track a little bit. Oh, happy day. If you don't know it, look it up. Okay, moving on. All right, and then we have the relationship to history and culture here. Okay, we talked about some of these also. We talked about we shall overcome. It does not also, oh no, here it is. And lift every voice and sing. We listened to both of those and talked about the importance of the motivation behind writing that music. So read about that. Here are some sample questions about gospel music. All right, now soul music. Got some objectives here and key ideas as well. And I noticed that it starts out with mentioning Sam Cooke and Ray Charles, and we briefly talked about Sam Cooke's, but be good going over these because these might be things that you may have forgotten that we didn't focus on as much, and they might come up on the test. You can always go back into the unit and read about it again. Okay. Let's see. What else do I want to point out? We did talk a lot about James Brown, and might be all that I wanted to. Oh, the 3 major independent labels. Remember the Atlantic, Motown, and Stax. Now, Motown is a whole other style that we mentioned that we went over, and so we'll go through that a little bit in the review as well. And then it talks about the important soul artists. Okay. All right. And then the relationship to history and culture, and they have a lot more to do here. And actually, it does combine somewhat into some of the things that we also mentioned with Motown, just because using kind of that feeling of wanting change. And so it's talking about how it was soul music was overlapping with the civil rights movement. And so a lot of people were writing music that would be that catalyst for change and wanting to be activists for the causes that they believed in. So in some ways, the Black community was growing weary of peaceful preaching. And so some of people were a little bit more writing about things that wanted to be a little bit more outspoken, of not necessarily feeling like we need to just be peaceful, but really speak out against things. And some people didn't necessarily believe the same things. It depended, which we're going to talk about also when we get to Motown music down here. It talks about different artists and how they wrote music to do different things with that. That was also in this part too. Earth, Wind, and Fire. Curtis Mayfield was one that really worked. And it doesn't even say this, but know this, that it says Black Arts Movement, but also know that that is related to the Black Power movement. Okay, so if there's a question that's asking about which artist was related to the motivation behind the Black Power movement and Malcolm X, for example, that would be Curtis Mayfield. Okay, so here's some simple questions for that. And I think this is interesting. I don't know if this is an error. I think, well, this has got to be, because this is not, this was a sample question for Unit 1, right? So I'm like, wait a minute. No, these are not sample questions for soul music. So just ignore that, really, because we already did this, unless you can practice it if you still haven't done Unit 1 test, because this is definitely in there. But this is not part of Unit 2. So who knows? It must be a typo or something. All right, Motown music, talking about the influences that inspired it. One of the sessions musicians' role. We learned about the Funk Brothers, and they were session musicians for Motown Records. So they were in the recording studio helping record for the artists. We didn't talk a lot about that, so I thought I'd point that out since it's in here. And anyway, main thing, obviously knowing about Berry Gordy Jr. We talked a lot about that in both of our last lessons about it, and how he found Smokey Robinson, and that really encouraged him to start Motown Records. Okay, and also talked about that image that Berry Gordy wanted to create. It talks about also a proven formula. So it's kind of what he planned out for things to be successful and appeal to a lot of different fans from different backgrounds. All right. So now we didn't talk about this in class, but the Funk Brothers, they also not only played for Motown artists, but they also played for these other artists here. You can read them. So just know that because that might come up on the test as well. Just review that a little bit. So here are some important Motown artists. We did talk about all of these during the lesson. And then the relationship to history and culture. So there are some different things about this cause music. Berry Gordy didn't think it was marketable, so he tried to avoid it. But technically, I mean, Marvin Gaye was a Motown artist, and he was the one that we really learned about making that Black Concept album, What's Going On, right here. Okay. So it's not that he totally avoided it, but he tried to avoid it some because he wanted it to be more appealing to everyone, didn't want it to stand out as much. But he did create that charm school to help people, I guess, fit that image that he wanted. All right, so here are some sample questions on that. Okay, back to the review area. Okay, so if you go through, there's 19 pages of this, right? So some of them are quizzes. I'm not going to do the quizzes on this review video. You can do those yourself, but I encourage you to do that because when you're doing that, it's going to help you go through and see what you know, and then you can check your answer. So I'll start it a little bit. What pattern is the standard blues form based on? If I select 4 bars, it's going to say, no, that's not right. So you get a chance to try again. Okay, so that will help you find the correct answers and hopefully you'll remember them for the test. So here we have some information about some of the blues artists. So make sure you're reviewing this because if it's in here, it's very likely on the test. Okay, the Rolling Stones is not specifically known as a blues band, but they were totally from a different place. They're from England, but it talks about how they were enamored by the energy of the blues. So they were influenced by it. So I'm thinking, you just need to know that that was a band that was influenced by that, by the blues movement and all of that. So, all right. And here's another little quiz you can take to kind of make sure you know that. Talks about the origination of the blues, even the minstrels, and what that was about. So you can go through here and learn about different things about that so that you make sure you're able to understand it for the quiz or the test, that is. Make sure you read this about Jim Crow because that's going to be something that you need to understand. And now it is known as a racial slur. Okay, so at the time it was accepted as something that was, the way to spread blues music around. White artists were dressing up in blackface. We know now that that's just not appropriate, but there was a lot of racism going on at that time. So this is, right after the war, after the Civil War. So we've got here in the 1870s talking about the minstrel groups. Okay. And now we have a music quiz. Wait, did I skip something? No, that was just the minstrels. Okay. So then there's this practice on blues music. Moving on to 4 types of gospel music. Okay, make sure you read about this and know that Thomas Dorsey was the father of gospel music. Okay, that's going to be on there. But knowing that we have traditional gospel choirs, Southern Gospel Quartet, so that would where they would have 4 gospel parts. And we talked just a little bit about traditional Southern gospel, but it's something to know that is different from really the Black gospel movement that was happening at the time. You can read about that. The gospel quartet, that's more going on with that. And then the gospel soloist, okay, so oftentimes there would be a solo singer and very, very talented people that would sometimes then want to pursue their own solo careers, like Mahalia Jackson, for example. All right, then there's a quiz about that. Continuing on. And there's even a true or false, okay. We did this in class, okay. I noticed that when we were in, some of you were probably looking at this, we're not in class. Many people got this wrong. American slaves were not Christians in Africa originally. Okay, became Christians, some of them, when they were brought over because it was told that they had to do that. It was indoctrinated. So they became Christians as sort of a way to convert them from the slave owners. Another thing that I got wrong originally when I went through it was no, they never considered their slaves family. They were their property. I said that at first. I said, well, maybe some slave owners did, but it doesn't say some. So you have to know and think about how it's really worded. There may be some that did, especially if they were living in the house with them. There are different types of slaves that you may have heard about if you've studied it, like house slaves and field slaves. And if people were taking care of their children, for example, they may have considered them more close to family, but they were still their property. So that's definitely a no. All right. You can do that yourself if you would like to. And then it talks about codes and songs. So this is important to do because there may be some questions about what was behind the meaning of Go Down Moses. Okay, it was one of Harriet Tubman's favorite. Okay, so this talks about why they used it. What was that supposed to mean? They also, there's one that talks about that as well. Oh, here it is, Gospel Train. Another one we talked about it is not on the test, which is Follow the Drinking Gourd. Sorry. So anyway, you can read about that and what Gospel Train was about, the Underground Railroad. Okay, and now we've got a little matching thing that you can do. We did this. No, we didn't do this one, I don't think, in class, but this is kind of good to check your knowledge. And quiz. So this part is about soul, and it didn't even review the soul yet. So it's kind of like a way of checking yourself before you even review some of this. This is that little video that talks about songs of protest. You may have already watched this. I'll play it right now. And then some more things about true or false. And this is about that soul music as well, which you kind of already reviewed in the other page. All right, here's some things about the Funk Brothers. Okay, and this is kind of good, I think, because I didn't talk about this in class, but there was a lot of information about it, and so there'll be some questions about that on the test, about what they did for helping record all the different artists and who they were. Robbie White, Eddie Willis, Joe Messina. There are others, but these were the originals, and these are the guitarists, and that really has changed over the years, so this is just a artistic representation of that. And then our pianists, they have Earl Van Dyke and Joe Hunter. Okay, and lots of percussionists. And the bassist. And I think there were other bassists, but James Jamerson is the one to know for sure because he was a very important artist for the soul musicians at that time, especially. So be reading about that. And then we have another quiz to go through to help you make sure that you know about Motown music. So what I've noticed about this is it doesn't have as much review for soul and Motown as it does just taking the quiz. And maybe that's because they figure, hey, you just learned all this, so you should know it. But it does have several questions again on, these are ones we went in class just recently. So if you were in class, then you went through these already, but it's good to check your answers on that. Okay, so in the Motown greats. All right, so this is what we need to make sure that we are going through. You could do this on your own